Okay, here we go. Um, First of all, I'd like you to welcome to the first UFE presentation ever. Um, this is also first for me because this is the first time we're actually broadcasting live on YouTube for everyone who's abroad and who's not in the office right now. Um, for the people who are missing right now, they can always get back to this video because it will stay recorded on YouTube in its entirety after we finish. And I hope you get everything you need from this, and I hope it's consistent with what you were expecting, because by using this presentation, in theory and in practice, you'll be able to actually start creating websites using our new EveryMatrix UFE platform, including the CMS3 and including well, basically everything you need. Right, so here we go. This is an overview of what we'll be doing. First of all, we'll start by looking at what React is in particular, and what notions we need to figure out from React in order to actually use the UFE platform. Then we'll set up the project locally, or rather, you'll be able to follow the setup from a documentation perspective, and then just let me know if you have issues with installing it. Then we'll have a quick overview on the structure of the project and what the files are for which you have access to immediately. And then we'll figure out how the content works in CMS3, a general overview of that. And finally, for today, we'll stop at 5. Best practices in structuring CSS and using HTML and JavaScript for the React project. So today we'll cover 1 through 5, and I think tomorrow we'll cover 6 through 8, and you'll have a homework. You'll also have a homework today for tomorrow. For those of you who haven't installed the project, you'll have to install the project and read the documentation articles in order for you to actually know what's going on and how you can edit files and so on. So let's get started. By the way, this presentation, this PDF will be available after we finish as a PDF download from our website. I'll post the link to the PDF in the description of the YouTube video, also on the Skype channels, and I can also send it to you if you like via Skype. So let's get started. The prerequisites for actually using the UFE platform and for developing websites using the UFE platform are the following. You need an active directory with EveryMatrix in order for you to have access to all the repositories and all the sources, and for you to have the rights, the proper rights for committing to Git. You also have to log in to Git for at least one time, so we can validate your account, and I can add you to the proper repositories so you can download the source files yourselves. And you'll also need a good IDE, such as WebStorm, or well, you can use anything you like, but WebStorm also has an embedded console, which is very good, and you'll be able to do things faster by using WebStorm. If you don't have a WebStorm license, you can request it from me, and I'll grant you a license immediately. So this shouldn't be a problem going forward. Okay. I hear the Vietnam colleagues are with us, so welcome to them. Basically, I've just walked through what we'll be doing today. I don't think I need to go back because this is going to be self-evident. So these are the prerequisites. You will need an Active Directory account to get started. So I think for our Vietnam colleagues, they'll have to wait for help desk to actually deliver, or system to actually deliver the Active Directory accounts, and then they'll be able to start working. So if you need me to speed up the process, I can talk to them directly. So just let me know after the presentation is over, Tien or anyone else in Vietnam. Okay, about React. Point one. So React is a nifty little tool built by Facebook for building websites. It's an architecture which is very close to the JavaScript, let's say, frame of reference. It allows you for greater flexibility in using your tooling and using what types of scripts you want to be a part of your build, and also for content which has a very large number of DOM changes. At the point in which we compare it, for example, with Angular 1, it was a very good idea to use React as an alternative. So that's why our framework today is based on React. For example, on EveryMatrix sites, which have a lot of odds changing very rapidly, all the DOM changes were very slow on Angular 1, and that's why we switched to React. So this is why we're using React right now. The part of React we're very interested in today, and you'll be very interested in from now on, is JSX, because JSX is the templating engine for React. I've embedded the links here, so you can read more about JSX if you want to. And you'll actually have to do that quite soon. But the point is that JSX is a templating engine, much like everything else you've used until now. If you've used PHP or something similar, it's very similar to let's say, Mustache or Handlebars, or it's a templating engine basically. And the point with this JSX templating engine is the fact that it's very similar in writing to using JavaScript and embedding HTML in JavaScript. So, for example, return div hello props points to what? So this is a variable, and this is JSX. It looks like HTML with embedded variables in it. So basically, that's what you need to know. Let's say we'll touch on this in greater detail when we actually get to work. But it feels like using HTML quite naturally, so I hope you won't have too much trouble with it. Right. There's a tutorial here. Actually, there are a couple of tutorials in this PDF. You'll be able to access them as soon as I send the PDF to you. And well, this is an example from the code itself. This is how a random React component looks like by using JSX right here in the button area. So this is a button, an HTML button, and it has several properties and several contents which are defined in this file, higher and lower. I will actually open up a file and show you how it looks. So this is the seed project. I think I'd better open, actually this will do as well, I think. Let's see. Second. Right, so let's open EM Casino. Or rather, I can just open React Casino. And I'll show you something from here because it's a bit easier. Okay, this is a test button. This is JSX. Let me make this a bit larger for you to see back here with the projector as well. This is JSX. This looks like HTML. And this also looks like HTML. This is a React component. And it's used like an HTML tag. So all the components our colleagues at the component team are building can be used like this. The name of the component is anchor, and it's defined somewhere else. For example, it's defined over here, in components anchor. So this component, let me show you that as well. Components, actually it's built here. Anyway, I'll get back to this a bit later because I need to download it and I don't want to do that right now. The reason why I don't have direct access to this is because it's already built. So let's get back to the presentation and we'll get back to that later. So what you need to know about JSX is the fact that it looks like HTML. It's not HTML, but it's very similar to it, and I believe you'll have an easy time with it. Right. So we need to figure out how this new architecture looks like. So right now, so until now, the old platform was built by basically copying an old client with all its files and then editing it so it looks like a new client, plus the configuration and so on. When you are building new clients on UFE, it works pretty much the same, but we've begun by building a seed project, which is barely empty, which is basically empty, so it doesn't have any content at all, any relevant content anyway. And you can safely duplicate it without having the need to edit the text, for example, to search for a different client name and so on. It's a bare bones starting point for all the UFE sites. And we'll be using it to build all the sites from now on. We could also, in the future, when we have several sites available, we could also duplicate an existing site with all its code and all its content, and use it in the similar way we've been doing so far, with clients which are already built, and then cloning them basically, and editing what's cloned. So we can do that with UFE as well, but if you have a client which is completely different from anything else, I suggest you use the seed project and clone from there. Also, React Casino is not an option right now, mainly due to the fact that it has a few issues which doesn't allow. I mean, I wouldn't recommend us cloning React Casino right now because it has a few issues, especially with the CSS structuring and complexity. We'll get into that right away. So there's a Git README for which you can gain access by logging into Git and going to git.everymatrix.com/UFE operator/seed. You'll see the UFE operators here. And you can go to the seed project, and the README file is right here. The README file for the seed project defines what you need to install for you to have full access to the seed project source. So you can then edit it and so on by creating a new Git branch and pushing your changes there. Basically, you will need to install Git. You will need to install Node.js. You will need to connect to our private registry, which has changed, by the way, in the past few days. You will need access via VPN to this registry compared to what we've been using so far, both for security reasons and for simplification of architecture. You will need to install Yarn, and I'm stopping right now because I need to explain what everything does. I think you know what Git does. It's a source management tool. Node.js is what everything is based on from a server perspective. So Node.js is our server. Yarn is a tool which manages dependencies and packages. So basically, every external package we use for our UFE sites is managed via Yarn. And then when you have this in place, you need to set up Git to work with SSH keys. Most of you have done this already for OMFE, for example. So you don't need to do it again. But if you don't have access to it, just let me know and I'll help you with this. And then our core packages, which the components team have built, are located in the UFE repository. You can actually install, it's a node module, a whole node module with all the components, the default components in it. And you can install it the same way you install Yarn, npm install UFE. By the way, for Windows users who have issues with installing this, the packaging tools must use some Visual Studio libraries. You'll need to install Visual Studio first if you don't have them installed. If you don't have it installed already, because there's a node git dependency. There's a node git error when you try to install UFE, and it can be only resolved by actually installing Visual Studio, so Node can get access to the .NET packages it needs to actually parse this. Then once you get the dependencies in place for this project, installing it is just a matter of cloning the Git project, which is this one. This is basically the link for the Git source of the master branch in seed. You'll need to clone this. You will need, when you clone this, it will automatically create a folder which is named seed. And inside it, in order for install dependencies for that particular project, for the seed project, you need to perform a yarn install. How do you do that? Well, basically by opening the IDE and typing in yarn install. I've already done this, so I can give you an example of it right now. I've created the folder on my hard drive, which is called Seed Workshop. Inside it, I've ran a lot of, those commands, which I've already typed above. And the end result is this. I have a seed folder. And inside that seed folder, initially, I only have, let me delete this for a minute. Nothing bad will happen if I delete these. These are basically generated when you install Yarn with, when you perform a Yarn install for all the dependencies and when you run the project for the first time. So I'll just demo what happens after you perform the action stated right here, which is git clone. So after you manage to clone the master branch of the seed project, you will be able to have access to the src folder in the seed, in the new seed folder generated by the git. And inside the src, I'm now at d/seed workshop. I need to go inside the seed folder, and in here I perform a yarn install. This, as I said, installs all the dependencies. I'm asked what version of VM components I need to choose for everything. I'll just press enter. So you don't have to actually pick anything from the list. And it now, from Git, it fetches everything from the components which we've installed via UFE in Node. I'll get back to that in a moment. So downloading the source files is step 1. Running yarn install is step 2. Yarn install will create the node modules folder inside the seed folder. Here we go. As you see here. And once this is done, there are 24,000 dependencies here. Okay. So it downloaded the packages inside the node modules. It unpacks them right now and prepares them for use. And it saved a log file. So this is important. I'll detail the log file tomorrow. But step 1 is finished. Step 2 is finished. Step 3 is actually performing UFE dev. UFE dev uses the newly downloaded node modules and a configuration for accessing actual content. And it performs the first build of the website, so we can actually run it and see how it looks. This website is this website structure is controlled in the CMS, and I'll detail that in a moment. And by doing all this, you will now be able to access localhost 3000 localhost 3000 basically. Okay. It will automatically redirect you to the language version, which is by default EN. And this is what you're going to see. This is basically a default page configuration from CMS with the header and some content, game lists, basically. Right, so we've now successfully ran the seed project. And we can now move forward with what we have learned. So we've set up the seed React project. And once we have the master branch on our server, we can now create a branch for our personal use. Please, please, please don't commit anything on the master branch. And don't push anything on the master branch. Just create your own branch, and then you can play as much as you want with your own branch without any issues. Right, here we go. This slide basically details what you can do with the console inside the WebStorm. And the first thing you can do to see that everything is well set up is run git status. And this will print out something like your own master branch. Your branch is up to date, and there's nothing to commit, working pretty clean. Let's test it out. So we've run everything here. I hope you can see my console properly. Okay, I'll just stop this server in order for me to be able to give it commands in this same terminal. By the way, the stop command is Control-C, but we'll get to that a bit later. So I am now in the seed workshop seed, right? So I just need to run git status. Apparently, our colleagues have just modified the some dependencies. So the message we've talked about earlier is not displayed. What is displayed is I'm on master branch. My branch is up to date with origin master, and there are changes not staged for commit. What this means is that when I built the project, it generated a new yarn lock, and this yarn lock is basically a change in the root of the project, in the main branch, in the master branch. So I could just push this to the master branch, but I won't. I'll just create a branch from this and work on that branch. So I won't do any changes on the master branch. So the command I'm running here is git. So every git command, of course, is preceded by git. And what I'm trying to do is detailed in the next slide. So this text says that this is a good starting point whenever your branch is behind master, which means somebody else updated the master branch between the time you fetched it from the server and the time you're checking for this. It's good practice to update it to the latest version. So you can use it, this command whenever you have no modifications to the master branch. We do have modifications, so I will not perform the git pull command. I will get back to it immediately. But this is something we actually need to do. We need to check out a new branch, because we have that change with the yarn lock, which is auto-generated from the dependencies, and I don't want to commit that on master. I just want to commit that on a new branch, on my branch, which I can play with. So git checkout -b fix / your name -test. So what this does is, as I said, all the git commands are preceded by git checkout. You can check out the docs here for checkouts if you want to, and read them in detail. But basically, checkout fetches. Fetches the files for a particular branch, and the -b tag creates that branch if it isn't already created. So locally, based on the files I have right now, I can check out a new branch and create it if it doesn't exist with the -b tag, and name it fix / virl -mocano -test. Let's do that. So as you see, this shows me that the modified yarn lock has been moved to the new branch, and the final command, the final message here is switch to a new branch fix / -test. So basically, I've moved this modified file into the new branch, so I don't commit anything to master. As you'll be able to figure out, checking out a new branch checks it out locally, so it doesn't affect the server version or the server branches. The text here says that this should basically create a new branch from the branch you're currently on, in this case master, and name it according to what you typed in when typing fix your name test. For example, fix virl -test. Please be aware that branch names are easier to declare with URL-friendly titles. So as you see here, there's no space here, there's no special character, there's just fix / virl -test with dashes between. No spaces, no special characters, dashes between words. When you're using the console, since you won't need basically when you're using the console, you could just use quotes and declare the branch name differently with spaces and special characters, but we won't do that because it's much easier to use a URL-friendly version of the name of the branch, since some IDEs auto-complete it when you press the tab key and you want to use that branch for something. Let's say you then proceed to edit the project source to solve a particular problem. In our case, we have that yarn lock file. You then need to commit the changes to the new branch you're on. So I've created a new branch, but I haven't committed the changes in that branch. Let me do that right now. But first, let me explain the command. So git commit -am fix CSS resolve dropdown in top menu. This is an example, of course. So git commit commits the changes on my current branch, and -am basically, I think Radu can help here.
Well, instead of git add and then git commit means null, it does the both.
Okay, so it's a shorthand version for git add. So I won't have to run git add for adding files to this commit. And this adds everything and commits it with the message. -m is message. And this is a standardized message, a standardized type of message. It uses the standards from Angular. This is the type of commit message. This is the context, and this is the actual message. And it can be a bit longer than this if you have to, but ideally this is the format. So let's just commit the changes to our current branch. Git commit -am. Okay, fix yarn lock. Commit new yarn lock. By the way, if you speaking of creating branches, if you have a big project which you already started and there's a bug, let's say, you can create a branch like fix dash the Jira ID and dash the description. So this is easier for you to identify what task you're on, for example, for each branch. But we'll get back to that when we get to the advanced Git features. So git commit -am fix yarn lock commit new yarn lock. Okay, this means that the current branch has a new commit, and I can now push it to the server. So let me go back to this. Now that you have a local branch and you committed something to it, others won't know about it until you push the branch information and changes to the Git server. This is done by the following command: push, git push, origin, which sets the origin branch on the server, fix your name test. So this is the branch on the server you want to push to from your current branch, your currently selected branch. And of course, this will be git push origin fix viral Mocano test. And since it doesn't exist, it automatically creates it on the server as well. By the way, we can check this doesn't exist yet by actually going in the GitLab and assessing the status of the branches, but we won't do that. Just trust me on this. So git push origin. Let's run that right now. Git push origin fix / viral Mocano test. Let's see. I think it went well, or did it? Yeah, I think it did. Let's check it out. So I'm going into get-everymatrix.com. In the seed project, branches. Here we are. Fix viral Mocano test. Fix yarn lock commit new yarn lock 2 minutes ago. So this branch is created and it's live on the server. Using the command line for Git is extremely helpful, as Mihai likes to state anytime he can, because it allows you greater access to advanced features, and it allows you greater speed in running Git commands. Also, source tree is okay, but it has a few issues, it has a few bugs, and I don't necessarily recommend using source tree for our projects. It's much better to start learning the Git commands by yourself and just ask me or the components team members if you have any sort of issues with them. We'll be glad to help. Okay, I've pushed fix Velmocano test. This means that on top of the remote branch named fix Velmocano test, which didn't exist before, the local branch you're on transmits the changes and pushes them onto that origin branch. And since that doesn't exist initially, it just creates it at this point and sends your fix to the server branch named fix Velmocano test. For that branch to become a part of the main project, you'll need to create a merge request in the EveryMatrix GitLab and wait for someone to review it. There's a documentation here for how to create a merge request. You'll be able to access that once you have the PDF. But basically, going back here, we have this branch. We have created a new branch, right? If we go back to the project area, we also have a new button here, create merge request. Because GitLab is smart and it detects that you pushed to a certain branch. So you can create a new merge request. Without creating merge requests, none of your changes will reach the master and none of your changes will get deployed. So it's mandatory for you to create merge requests on all the changes you want to do, including on new branches, including on new projects and so on. So please don't skip the step and don't push directly to master because it's not okay. Right, so the title of this merge request is identical to the title of the last commit. If you remember, we declared the last commit like this, fix yarn lock, commit new yarn lock. We can leave it like this. Again, if you have, let's say, a task in Jira, instead of fix / Velmocano test, you will have fix / Jira ID dash the description. Let's say it's still Velmocano test. And in here, the commit message doesn't need to have the Jira ID. So this is just what happened with the project, not necessarily the description from the ID. However, if you have a branch and you're committing multiple bug fixes, each commit should have an ID from Jira. So for example, CI 12345, commit new yarn lock. This makes it much easier to follow when we actually begin work and there are bugs to be fixed. Okay. The description is optional, but if you have a large commit, it's ideal to also write a description because the people who are going to review that merge request will need to have a look at your code and review what it needs to do according to either the Jira task or what you write in the description, basically. Most of the times for the assignee, you'll just pick me or Mihai Coman. And that's because in the beginning, at least, all the merge requests will be reviewed by 2 people. One of them should be a senior developer, and another can be any one of our colleagues, including senior developers. So at least 2 people have to look at your code before it reaches the server. Milestone is optional. We don't have a milestone set right now in Git. Maybe we should. We'll get back to that a bit later. Labels are also optional. It may be useful to use labels later on when you have a lot of sites and a lot of projects, because labels can, for example, identify common problems with several websites. So it's easier to follow the branches for several projects at once. The source branch is automatically chosen when you create the merge request for the branch you committed. So this is fix Velmocano test. The target branch is master, and I can just submit the merge request. Tomorrow we'll get back to this process because we also have to be careful about how many commits we have. And as you see, you can also see the changes live here. I think the yarn lock file was the old one, and Mihai just pushed the new one, and that's why there are changes in the yarn lock. But basically, when you commit, when you push something to the server, ideally, it should have one single commit. We'll talk about rebasing branches and so on tomorrow, but that's what you need to remember today. This should be just one commit when you have a merge request. And since I'm an administrator here, I can also accept my own merge request, but that's not a good practice ever. So once you create a merge request, someone will actually be able to, I mean, someone will be notified, me or Mihai, and they will look at the branch, they will look at the changes, they will perhaps ask you questions about it and so on. And then once two people press this button or just make a comment with +1 or something like that. So once two people press this button for making, I mean, delivering a good review, basically, this merge request can be merged into the master branch. What happens then is going to be a topic for tomorrow. But just to let you know, once a merge request is accepted, it will trigger the automatic deploy, and your code will reach the development medium. Right. In order for you to get better acquainted with how we do this and what you need to know in order for doing this right, there are some procedures and standards we're using. They're not written by us. We just use them because they're pretty well thought out. We use the GitHub flow. I think this is a link Adrian Punga sent a few weeks back. Let's open it for a minute. It details the workflow I've just described. So create a branch, add commits, perhaps just merge them into one single commit, open a pull request for GitHub, or in our case, open a merge request for GitLab, because we use GitLab internally. Discuss and review your code. So this is a back and forth between the developer who actually wrote the code and other developers who review the code. And once everything is ready, deploy. This is done by somebody actually going in the GitLab interface and pushing accept merge requests. And this will merge the branch. Basically, the deploy step here will assume that you deploy your own branch and test it before merging it. So that can be done as well, but we don't do it right now. Right, Mihai? Never mind. Okay, so my question was, right now we don't deploy prior to merging.
No.
Right? Okay. Will we?
No.
Okay. Then, so this step is not required. We don't. Okay. So at least at this point, we don't deploy prior to merging the branch. But of course, if somebody reviews your code and your code is very complex, let's say, somebody will have to install the project locally and get your branch and run it locally. So they will know for sure that you haven't done anything wrong with it. Okay. So after merging, as I said, we'll discuss what happens tomorrow, but please have a look at the GitHub flow and the Angular style for composing messages. 1 second, please. I can find it immediately. Okay, git commit rules. Here we go. Type, scope, subject. So what I've described earlier, type, scope, subject. The type is preset from this list: feature, fix, chore, docs, style, refactor, performance, and test. They're detailed in this. 1 second. They're detailed right here. So fit is a new feature, fix is a bug fix, docs is documentation only changes, style is changes that do not affect the meaning of the code. So be careful, style does not mean CSS. It means rearranging the code, white space formatting, missing semicolons, etc. Refactor, a code change that neither fixes a bug nor adds a feature. It just changes the way something behaves, but keeps the same functionality and doesn't fix any bugs, basically. Perf is a code change that improves performance. Test, adding, missing, or correcting the existing tests. This is something we'll discuss, I think, in workshop 3. And I'll ask Adi Gitsa to help out a bit here because he's the expert in automated tests. So we have an automated test suite which runs every time you build for deploying and for merging with, for deploying for pushing to Git. Chore, changes to the build process or auxiliary tools and libraries such as documentation generation. So in my experience, fit, fix, and chore are the most used commit messages, and the rest are a bit rarer. Okay, all merge requests need to be reviewed, as I said, by a minimum of 2 people before getting merged, the senior developer and the second colleague of any programming experience. This is because we need to keep the code as clean as possible, and this also includes me and Mihai. So when we push something to a project any of you are working on, if we need to merge it, we won't automatically merge it. We'll go through the same process of review and discussion. So if everyone respects this, I think we'll be having a lot of fun in development compared to the horrors we've been through so far with the old platform. This demo is, I can show you exactly. I've already showed you how this works in the code, so I won't go through this again. Let's talk about the structure of the project now. As you've seen here in the sources, this is for seed. There are several folders here. I'll just discuss them in the presentation because they're larger. Okay, so the cache folder is automatically generated when you start the server using UFE dev or another UFE running command. So you can also run the UFE server as production with UFE prod, but it basically does the same thing. This is the cache for all the files in the site. Dist is the repository of the built, compiled, and deploy-ready distribution, and it's automatically generated again when you run UFE dev. The dist folder is what the server uses to render the whole website. It's basically the SRC folder combined with the EM modules folder combined with the node modules folder in a single package. Okay, node modules is the package dependencies downloaded automatically upon yon install. So these are the dependencies for the project itself. If you actually want to use custom versions of the components inside the website, you can edit those components and push to their Git branch and modify the components themselves by including EM modules. EM modules is already included in node modules, but if the server detects that the EM modules folder is present here, it will fetch the sources from here, not from node modules. Let me demonstrate that. So EM modules is only present when you need to modify the actual contents of the components. You need to run UFE setup core dev to actually download them, and I'll do it right now so I can show you. But not until we finish this list. So node modules is the general modules folder for node. EM modules is the what we've built, what the colleagues at the components team have built. and they're also present in the node modules by default, but if you want to edit them, you can download them and edit them separately in the EM of modules folder. And the source folder is where the project source files are located, especially CSS and some other things, which are particularly for this project. Okay, let's test out UFE setup core dev. So I'm in here. Does anybody know how I can increase the font size of the tooling here?
Ctrl+Shift+.
Control Shift. No, doesn't work on the left menu. It works here.
On the left menu, you need setting appearance. Then go away with the page.
Right. Let's
try enter presentation mode. Maybe that will help.
how do I do that?
Click cancel. Ctrl Shift A.
Cum?
Ctrl Shift A. Presentation mode.
Yeah, but this just shows the code.
Okay. Click again.
Right. So I also want the structure over here on the left. Let's see if I can override this. Doesn't work. Not as I wanted. Okay, so I'll just pretend you can see this, and if you can't, I'll just walk you through this. So we have the seed project, we have the cache folder, we have the dist folder, we have the node modules, and inside the node modules we have em underscore em. What? One second. Em. What's this name again? EM underscore modules. Yeah, they're. I mean, the contents of the modules are directly in the folder, and they're named EM dash. There we go. EM Babel, EM Casino, EM Components, EM Conf, EM Core, EM ESLint, EM Finance, and so on. So these are our node packages. And by running UFE setup core dev, instead of using the default packages from the node modules, we can control their content. Let me just download this right now. So as you see, it clones EM modules, which are EM Core, EM User, EM Casino, EM Web API, EM Utils, EM Components, and EM Finance. And then it clones them inside the folder named EM Modules. So these folders are identical to these ones inside node modules, but here you can edit them, and the edits will actually see you'll be able to see your edits in the local server. And you'll be able to push them as well, but we'll get back to that tomorrow when we get into greater detail for advanced Git features. So each of these folders is basically a different Git root, a different Git project. And you can push changes on branches for each of them in particular. Okay. Of course, there are also some special function files inside the project folder as well. Again, we'll discuss this tomorrow. This is package JSON site config medium JSON, which is medium is stage dev or prod, and yarn lock. Okay. Right now, I need to show you what the finished product of this whole architecture is. This is React Casino, the website. We can analyze its structure after we figure out how this all works. So let's get into greater detail with CMS. Basically, what you see here in the page itself is described architecturally in the CMS interface. So when you write a React component, or when you write contents inside the actual code, you do not decide what the site structure will be. You just write components, and then you use those components in the structural interface of the CMS, which I'll log into right now. By the way, this link is backoffice.everymatrix.com/login. If this doesn't work properly, just use backoffice-cloud.everymatrix.com. But apparently, backoffice.everymatrix.com works well today. Okay, so I'm going to log into this. You will need rights to access this properly. So once you try to log in the first time, please let me know so I can request the rights for you to access the CMS from, I'm not sure from who, but we'll figure that out soon. I think from GM Access. So this is the CMS interface. This is basically UBO, and the CMS part is right here. Please notice that I'm using the EveryMatrix product, and inside the EveryMatrix product, I'm using the operator named reactcasino.com. This is very important. Please pick your operator before doing anything, because this works more or less similar to CMS1. If you edit something without picking this up, it will edit the generic files and not the client-specific files or the site-specific files. So this is, by the way, the production CMS link. So what we're going to see here is reflected in the structure of the production site. We will not make edits right here. For you to play with the seed project, you'll get access to the stage environment, which is this one. I'll embed the link so you can access it right after the presentation. And let me know if you don't have access to it so I can provide that. Okay, so let's analyze the structure of reactcasino.com in production. As you see here, this is the CMS interface, and it has several areas. General content, which contains data about the site in general, and it will contain more soon. So we'll edit this and make it better as we go along, as we find the need to edit stuff. And there are several folders here. Just for this particular part of the demonstration of the presentation, I'll go into the page area, and I'll go into the casino part. So you can see that the casino page with this URL /casino, which is this, uses a header, a content, and a footer. This is a template, which is called main template. Inside this template, there are two parts. I mean, each of these is a component. So each of these is defined by a React component in the code. And some of these components have subcomponents. So let's try and figure out the content part, right? So the content part starts here, and it ends about here, before the footer. Let's see what the contents of the content are. General title with the name Casino Lobby title. Let's see how this looks. The title is Casino Lobby, and the option, which is basically the tag used, is H1. As you see, it doesn't appear here because it's made invisible in the CSS. Let me make this bigger. and make this smaller. The site is responsive, by the way, it's fully responsive on all resolutions. So again, I just display block here. You'll be able to see the H1. Then, general layout casino search wrapper. This is a wrapper which has two components inside: game search and model trigger show favorite games. The search part is by all means visible here, and the model trigger is not. Why? Because it has some parameters here. Is authenticated true, and that means that if I log in, let's see, maybe not that one. React prod, this should work. So once I log in, you'll see both the search and the trigger for the favorites. I'll show you how everything is done when we get into the nitty-gritty details, but basically the CMS structure defines how the page, what the page loads. You don't do that in the code. And that's a very important aspect, because you will have a lot to do with the CMS before actually launching a website, because you first need to define the structure in the CMS and then style it, and then make sure that everything is okay responsively and so on. So let's move on a bit. One second, please. Some colleagues are writing on Skype things that I've missed, which is great. I'll mention them at the end. So let's move on a bit. The CMS3 has a documentation we've just recently churned out. It's not complete, but it will be if you give us your feedback on it as well. Oh, this is my bad. I've mistakenly made this a mail link, but as you see here. But it's at everymatrix.com/cms3.pdf. Let's try it. everymatrix.com/cms3.pdf. As I said, it's not complete. It's more or less a quick look into what the CMS does, and we'll be able to complete it with your feedback as well. So if you see something which doesn't make sense, just let us know and we'll edit it so it does. Okay. This is, so in order for me to explain better how the CMS works, let's look at three contexts. This is a context in which all the, how does a website work, basically? The most simple example is you have a web server, which is Apache, Nginx, or whatever you like, in which you have static files, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and images, and they're all fetched by the browser, and the end user sees the full web page. This is the simplest example. By contrast, a regular CMS like WordPress works like this. You have a web server in which you have some templates and a database. There's a core that fetches data from the templates and from the database and arranges them into a static HTML file. Inside that server, there are also JavaScript and CSS files. Let's say it also uses a CDN server for static images. And they all get served to the browser to form the web page that the end user sees. Is this, does everybody agree with me? Is this clear enough?
Yeah.
Okay. This is how UFE works. It's a bit more complex, but it's not that complex. What you need to know is the fact that There are a lot of APIs behind UFE, a lot of APIs, GM, Casino Engine, Money Matrix, Odds Matrix, and so on. They all speak to the delivery layers, as I've just invented the term today. The delivery layers are things which we won't go into detail right now. I think we will later on, but not today. The point is that the delivery layers are several layers which combine the information from all the APIs, transport them to the end user. Also, there's a CDN and the firewall and the load balancing and the router part to this to these layers. And basically, the end result is that through these delivery layers, we get HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and images, and they get rendered into the static web page, which is a placeholder for the content. And then the CMS, which provides both structure, the structure of the page and the text. Again, I've simplified this quite a lot. It doesn't really work this way, but just so you can understand it easier, the CMS provides JSON content alongside actual content from Casino Engine, for example, the games, and that's asynchronous content. So initially the web page loads, and then the APIs are called, and everything gets back with asynchronous content, which is the page structure, the components, the component texts, the actual Casino Engine or Money Matrix, for example, or Odds Matrix content, like games, like payment methods, like sports, like bets and so on, odds. And this is what the browser has at the end and what gets served to the user. Initially, the user just sees the initial static web page, and then it gets served the asynchronous content, ideally as fast as possible, but that depends on how the APIs respond and how the transport service handles the requests. So that's why CMS is very important, because you need to figure out how to structure the web page first, and then make sure that all the JavaScript, basically all the CSS and the images are properly stored. Images are also stored in the CMS. So this is a mistake from my part. Basically, they're stored in the CDN, but they're linked in the CMS. But I think this is a pretty simple picture of what happens when you use, for example, acadEMy and when you access it. Okay, let's now go back to the CMS interface, and I'll show you a few things. Let's see. There we go. So we were here at the game search and the model trigger. Model trigger is a component. Game search is a component. They're all components. And the way components work is that components represent the content part of a React component. So CMS components and React components are different, but they're very tightly intertwined. When somebody wants to create a new component, for example, a client wants to have a banner with 2 odds and the game, and this doesn't yet exist in our component list. The workflow is like this. Somebody asks the component team drafts the React code for it. We can review it, of course, especially if it's for our project, and make sure that the HTML structure is okay and so on. Then the component is published, we get it in our code, and the component team also place it here in the component folder in the CMS. So in the CMS, in the component folder, these are all the components available right now for UFE, and they'll get updated as we go along. Let's take an example, a casino game list. The casino game list component has a schema which defines how the actual data is rendered and how the code is used, basically. We don't need to get into details here. This is not for you to edit at this point. You just need to know there's a schema for the games list. Changes. Thank you. Okay, and these are the instances in which the component is used. These are all the pages, basically, and all the sorry, somebody says that the internet is down or something. Can you see and hear what I'm presenting? Just write a comment or something. Okay. So apparently it works. Let's move on. So these are all the instances that component is used, and you can add an instance from here, but ideally I just go inside the page itself. For example, in the content area, there's a button here, add. And then you can choose the component, for example, general text. And the general text component has multiple instances. What are instances? In short, when you have a component, that's a, let's say, a template for how that component can be used. Each component can have several contents in several instances. So when you create a component, you create a mold, and inside that mold, or using that mold, you can create instances of that component which have different contents. Let's see exactly what that means. So we have the text component, right? Let's go back again and actually explore the general text component. The general text component, one general text component looks like this. It just has a text field set, and this is the text itself. Here you can convert RC box into real money. That's all. So it's basically a text box. Let's check usage, page RC box. Let's go to the page RC box. As you notice, clicking that actually opened the RC box page for me. It didn't highlight it in the left menu, but yeah, it works. So in the RC box page, I'll just search the text, general text. Here we are, RC box description. This is another component, general text, what you see is what you get. So it's a different component, but our clicked on component is right here, general text, RC box description. The screen went blank for me on YouTube. Ah, here we go, we're back. Okay. What that means is that when you create a component, you can have multiple instances, and each instance is separate as far as content goes, and it can be used anywhere on the site. So the instances can be used anywhere on the site by just adding them through here. So I can, if I want to duplicate the general text RC box description component, I go to add component from here, general text, and I can search here for RC box description. And I can click this link, and it appears here, general text RC box description. So I duplicated this component here. I can also move it over here, and it moves it in the final HTML. Let's test it out on production, because we're bold like that. You have successfully published this version. Okay, so let's go to RC box in React Casino. Okay, the changes aren't here yet because there's a caching layer we need to invalidate, but just refreshing this a couple of times should do the trick. If it doesn't, and apparently it doesn't, 1 second. Tica, când avem butonul de invalidate cache? Da? Yes. General settings. Okay, we should have an invalidate cache button here, but apparently we don't. Yeah? Ah. General settings. Okay, so we have a clear cache button. Let's hope we don't bring the site down. Cannot delete. What? Fine, let's go back then. We were in page RC box, as I remember. We see the changes here. So there's a duplicate RC box description. By the way, let's see what the text is. Here you can convert RC box into real name. Okay. Go back to the site. Let's refresh this page again. Maybe also authentication. Well, the changes aren't here yet, but there will be eventually. So this paragraph should be duplicated at some point. We'll also make sure that there are several caching layers, basically. So the CMS has a caching layer. Encapsula has also a caching layer, and we are halfway through developing a method for anyone to clear their cache at will, and we'll give you access to the interface once it's ready. So this is probably an issue with the caching layer. Just to touch upon this very, very fast, I want to also show you something neat. This is the network tab, and if we go to XHR on the site, if you analyze this URL, it's content3.everymatrix.com/views/a number /render view /UFE/view/UFE/site. Site name equals reactcasino.com is authenticated false. Let's open this in the new tab. So this is basically the JSON with all the content of the page. And here we can look for, how was that text again? Here you can convert RC box. Here you can convert. Let's search for that. Okay. No, it's not. At least. I'm on incognito too, so let me open another incognito to the incognito. Oh, my incognito cached it apparently. But we'll be able to see it eventually. Okay. I opened the wrong tab here. So this is the general site settings. So site name equals reactcasino.com, and this is actually the path RC box. So if you see on the second row of this, path equals RC box. Let's open this, and let's search for our text here, which is this. Here we go. 1 out of 1. This is cached, so if I just add an X at the end, which will invalidate it. Oh, sorry, not X, and X. But yeah, apparently that works too. I will see that there are 2 instances of, here you can convert RC box into real money. So this is just a caching problem. Don't worry about it. We will solve it somehow eventually. So you won't need to refresh this 1,000 times. Okay, so we've seen how the CMS can be accessed, how the components work more or less. We'll get back into much greater detail tomorrow about this. And we'll talk about layouts, templates, pages themselves, and best practices. However, before finishing this presentation today, I want to talk about best practices in the code part. So we'll talk about best practices in the CMS tomorrow, but returning to the presentation, let's talk about best practices for the code. A large part of creating a UFE site is comprised of CSS work, as you all know. And from now on, we have the technical capacity and strategic need to use and enforce standards in our coding. This includes the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But let's focus on CSS first. I'm not sure if everyone read this, but you should. These are the CSS standards we've discussed last year, if I remember correctly. They're at everymatrix.com/ses.pdf. And let's go through them very, very fast. Rule number 1, no important rules. So there are exceptions to this rule for CSS work, but they mostly comprise of third-party content which you can't edit. So if you have third-party content and you want to edit it, it's CSS, and there are important tags in the third-party content. You may use important tags in the CSS, but you'll need to find out how you can use that, because the important rules will crash the deploy. It will crash the push to Git. So if you try to push to Git some CSS which has the important tag inside it, it will not allow you to push. This is very punishing initially, because you will have to be very, very careful in how you write CSS, but you'll get the hang of it eventually, and it will feel much easier than it does at the beginning. So don't worry about messing up your first commits and your first deploys. That's normal, it's natural, but make sure that you remember the rules and enforce the rules from now on. So rule number 1 is no important rules. Rule number 2, no IDs, and ideally more classes. Never use IDs in CSS selectors unless you absolutely have to. The respective ID is certain to be singular in the project, not just in the page. Instead, use classes and other less imperative selectors. Of course, the reason for this is easy overriding of rules. It's basically in the same category as the important part. Important and IDs offer a separate layer of specificity for your CSS, and it's very, very bad practice to do that. Okay, rule number 3, exact selectors versus generic selectors. Ideally, you should never use this selector in your CSS, except maybe in resets and just once or twice, but ideally never, because this has a high impact on performance. Also, these selectors as well, greater than and plus, have a great impact on performance. This selector, element.class, for example, div.header or div.whatever, this is a qualifying selector, and it's not needed. You just need the class. So it's important to not write classes you don't need, or to not use selectors you don't need. Then, rule number 4, the fewer the better. Don't use more than 2 selectors unless absolutely necessary. At most, 3 selectors is ideal, and 4 selectors or more are generally forbidden. There needs to be a very, very clear use case for 4 selectors. And by the way, for people who like nesting selectors, this naturally creates a lot more than 4 levels for your selectors in the generated CSS. So nesting is also a problem. We'll get back to that after we finish this PDF. Okay, indented one-liners for the win. What does that mean? Place selectors and properties on a single line. like this. This isn't mandatory and it's not enforced, but it's a good rule of thumb for developing a project. If you start developing a project using this, don't stop halfway. Just develop it from now on. Just develop it from start to end. That's what I meant. So ideally, all the selectors are like this because if we go back to the code, for example, it's much easier to see the structure of the CSS if you have indents and if you use one lines for each. It's much easier to see the structure. Basically, this says that there's a section header container, and inside it there are 4, 5, 6, 7 kids, and the component mobile menu has again a few children. So this is very easy to read, and it makes the code a bit more compact. It's easy to read from a structural standpoint. If you're used to writing your selectors like this, that's also okay, but you need to understand that you also need to indent these selectors. And indenting these selectors is a bit tricky because it's much harder to keep track of the level you're on if you use that writing method. Moving on. Oh, sorry. We were in the SES rules. Rule number 6, media queries are great kids. All the elements of CSS which are due to change at certain resolutions must have media queries inside them. Why? Because if you move the definition of this element elsewhere, you also need to move its media queries. This is a best practice which derives from the fact that we need to use a way of writing CSS that is very modular. So if you want to use a certain CSS from one project to another, copying the selectors should be enough for that particular component, for example, to work well on the other project as well. And just that will just allow you to change some variables or colors or so. So that's an important rule. But also, there are the only, almost the only CSS indentation, nesting you will have to do. So media queries need to be nested inside their element, but other classes should not be nested inside other classes. Okay. When deciding what media queries to pick, content is a much better factor than devices. So seeing media queries for 728, 1024, and so on is not a good rule of thumb, because it's much better to look at your content, and when it starts to look bad, just add a media query. It doesn't matter if it's at 1614 pixels or 527 pixels. It doesn't matter at all, as long as the site looks good at that particular resolution. It adds a very, very small impact on the general architectural complexity, but it's much better than having preset and fixed resolutions for when you need to change the version of the site. And changing at preset resolutions is good for some things, but it's not good for everything. So again, if a content doesn't look good on a random resolution, just use that random resolution and add a new media query for it. Rule number 8, ordering selectors. Ordering properties inside selectors. This is enforced right now. Most of these are enforced, by the way, in the new architecture. So there's a certain order you need to respect when writing CSS properties, and this helps in readability. So if you're writing one-liners like this, having all the elements in a certain order makes sure that you find what you're looking for very easily horizontally. So display block is first here, 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 and here, and here, and here. You always find the display properties first. Then you'll find sizing properties like width, height, and so on. Then you'll find position properties like position, top, right, left, and so on. And having rules for how to write this is better because it will allow all of us to, let's say, make code that's easy to read and easy to adapt to several projects, irrespective of who writes the code. Okay, rule number 9, semantic classes. Classes like A, B, C, and so on should not be used. Please use classes which mean something, because when you read the CSS itself, this is a section header. This is an instance of a mobile menu header, and so on. So make it verbose, even if the classes are longer, it doesn't matter. Okay, rule number 10, no prefixes. So browser prefixes like Moz, WebKit, and so on are not used and are not needed in the new UFE platform. There are very few exceptions, and I will show you how to add those exceptions when you need them, but generally you don't have to use them. That's because we only support browsers who, we support browsers from I10 going upwards, or I11 rather. And if a browser doesn't have a particular styling defined because it's older and it's not it doesn't support a particular feature, we don't bother with it. So we just design for the most modern browsers and make sure the site works for older browsers. We don't spend time in making the site look perfect in older browsers from now on. Mobile first, this is extremely important. Write your media queries from the low media query to the high media query, and you only use min width. I've stated this again in the PDF of this presentation, but it's good that it's here as well. Mobile first allows you to begin with the simplest version of your website, and it allows you to structure the CMS part in a very logical fashion, and then just add things on top of the mobile version design as you need them and as the device grows in capacity for resolution, for bandwidth, and so on. So begin with the default styling for resolutions like 320, for example. And then when you need to add media queries to edit that, just add them progressively with min width. Then, in addition to rule number 6, semantic classes, we should strive to achieve a semantic order in our SAS variables and mixed names. This is a longer discussion, but in general, if you have a color, just prefix it with color. If you have, let's say, a font size function, mixin rather, just make sure that it spells out font size and it uses a function type capitalization and so on. Okay, this is not enforced yet, but I think it will be as soon as we get everything in order with the React platform. Comments which can auto-generate documentation. This is extremely powerful going forward, and we should start using it very soon. I'll let you know when this becomes mandatory. So this defines all the components and all the modules you're building. It doesn't need to be here for all the CSS you write, of course, just for the big important parts. For example, for using the login form, which is a component. It defines the type, which is a module or component or whatever. It defines the name, login form, which should be identical to the class name. Defines the author. It has certain dependencies like label and so on, and it has certain parameters like colors. So this will make the CSS a bit harder to write, but it will be extremely easy to maintain. But I'll let you know when we start enforcing this. Okay, These are writing standards. I won't go into the details. You'll read them yourself. These are animation standards, which basically say that you only should have 2 layers of animation at any one time, and you should only animate, transform, or opacity. Because we need to have a minimum of 40 or ideally 60 frames per second for all animations on the website. This is a rule stating that you only need to use UTF-8, Unix line endings, and binary file transfer if you need file transfer ever. And there are certain suggestions here. We'll talk about them later if you need to, but basically just try and use everything that's here to make sure that you write good code as far as CSS goes. Okay, let's go back to that. Okay, there's also a command you can write in the command line for the current project you're on to check if you're using the correct styling. And this command will automatically run when you try to push the branch into Git. For now, and just for testing purposes, so it doesn't, let's say, punish you too hard from the beginning, it just throws warnings for most errors. Let's see it in action. So I'm on the seed project I created earlier, and I can now run yarn saslint. And by running yarn saslint, yarn just checks, the saslint just checks all the CSS files I wrote and finds bugs or errors. For example, index CSS has several issues, several warnings triggered. For example, it has importance. This is most likely due to third parties, but again, it warns you of everything, and as soon as the workshop is over, it will fail pushes to the Git branches you're working on if anything like this happens to your code. So these can all be fixed, of course. So let's take an example. Index SCSS, line 113, column 199. Let's go to that particular area. So line 113. Here we go. This is a print CSS. These things, I mean, we can make exceptions for the important parts. As I said, the third-party options are, I mean, the third-party tools need to be overwritten with important tags if they themselves have important tags. And for the print media query, this can also be done with no impact to the final project site. So basically, there are rules you can add for the saslint to ignore this line in particular, but we'll get into that a bit later. So for now, just run yarn saslint and try to fix all the errors. And if you can't fix the errors, I'll let you know how to avoid the yarn lint, the saslint warnings or errors which can break your Git cycle. Okay. Let's move on. Okay, here are the extra code quality rules which are not mentioned in the original PDF, but I will update it sometime this week, I think, the SAS PDF with the CSS rules. So don't use max width in media queries. This is tied directly to the rule that you should use a mobile first approach. Max width usually gets used when people have a desktop design or a larger resolution design, and when they sorry, when they resize it to a smaller resolution, it breaks, and they add a max width for resolutions which are below a certain point. This is not okay. Why? Because when a browser accesses your site, if it has a 320 pixels wide resolution, and your media query start from 400 pixels, for example, it will not process and it will not process any of the 320 pixels, any of the 400 pixels or above media queries. If you have a max width defined in your media queries, it will process those. So the min width tag for media queries helps you help the small resolution browsers process less CSS, which of course helps performance. So this is a very important rule going forward. Okay, don't miss selectors. This is a bit like, I mean, this involves three things. First of all, this is a styling issue. So this is more or less subjective. There are some developers who prefer writing code like this because it's a bit easier and faster. But the end result is that your CSS will have up to 5 or 10 or 15 classes for one single selector. So a selector which has more than 4 layers is not okay. Including 4 layers is not okay. So avoiding this is best achieved by just not nesting selectors at all, with the exceptions of pseudo classes like hover, active, link, before, after, and so on, and media queries, which always need to be nested inside their own elements. And the final addition to the rules we've mentioned: don't use pixels for sizing. Use percentages, use viewport width, viewport height, rem, or even m if you like calculating a lot. We need to move on from pixel-based interface design because pixels are starting to become irrelevant. Devices which use arbitrary resolutions are appearing on the market more and more, and we need to think about design and interface in terms of percentages and screen dividing, not pixels. Pixels are obsolete in this current era of development. Let's talk a bit about HTML as well, and we'll finish in 7 minutes. I mean, I hope we'll finish in 7 minutes. I'm not sure we will go over that. The HTML coding standards we've built a while ago are a bit old because they have some legacy things in there. But in brief, code should be valid and semantic, and you should use microformats anywhere available. This is done in collaboration with the components team. More or less, the components team need to write the HTML. You'll write little HTML by standardly using the CMS for launching websites. When you will be writing HTML, it will be to help inform the components team how to write the components themselves. And of course, if you find issues with how the code is written right now, you can just let them know and they'll update the components to proper valid and semantic standards. All HTML elements should have a semantic class for styling in the CSS. Minimize the use of IDs. So this is self-evident. If all the HTML elements have a class, we can easy identifiable class, so a non-duplicate class, we can then style it in CSS much easier. IDs are not relevant for CSS. They may be relevant for JavaScript and for the React components, but IDs should be avoided at all costs. Property completion. All actionable elements should have titles, which means anchors, buttons, and so on. All images should have width and height, and an alt property. The alt property is used for SEO. Width and height is used for allowing the browser to not download your image before rendering the rest of the page. And there are usability and accessibility standards you need to respect, plus SEO standards. SEO is not really complete as far as components right now. So if you want to try out how React Casino, for example, fares on Google, you won't be able to because right now it doesn't serve server-based static files for Google, but it will very close in the future when the components team finishes with the SEO epic. Prefer using the picture element instead of images. Because we're building mobile-first websites, the picture element allows for any image on the site, like a slider image or anything like that, to have multiple variants, multiple alternatives. smaller resolution, medium resolution, high resolution. So mobile devices will only download the small resolution. Tablets, for example, will download the medium resolution, and desktops will only download the high resolution. So you will avoid using bandwidth for nothing, basically, by using the picture element. The minimum supported width, by the way, for mobile first liquid and responsive sites, which we'll begin to build right now, is 280 pixels. So if you're trying to build a website that works on a watch, you will fail. Use SVG icons and icon fonts and avoid PNG icons, except when making fallbacks for SVG and icon fonts. Fallbacks for SVG and icon fonts are not something we've built so far, but there may be clients which request that. I haven't heard of any so far. The point is that SVG and icon fonts are scalable, and they can be used at any resolution without loss of quality, and they're the ideal solution for icons in general. And last but not least, clearly not least, always think about performance. Use tools for testing performance, and you will be able to use those tools as soon as the SEO part is ready, and the server will actually serve static HTML for crawlers. Okay, I've already demoed this yarn saslint for checking your errors in the code, in the CSS code. I will also attempt to show you the horrors that lie inside React Casino right now. The horrors which are, well, we've partially fixed, let's say, but due to time constraints, we couldn't possibly fix everything. So here's, for example, the mobile menu. By the way, before looking at the code itself, let's look for a bit at the structure of the CSS. This is not something I recommend. There are 65, if I remember correctly, CSS files here. Every developer could just write CSS like this, but I prefer one single CSS file. So this is up to you. We will not comment on the way you use the CSS files, but please bear in mind that this could get extremely complex and complicated, as we've learned via the React Casino example. So each of these CSS files accounts for a different part of the website, and I believe having one single CSS file would have helped a lot by reducing complexity. Because this probably, I mean, having multiple CSS files just allows you to rewrite a lot of things from scratch, which is not a good practice. If you have one single file, you may be able to figure out that certain components can use the same CSS and just chain the selectors at will. So that's why this is one of the main reasons why I don't recommend duplicating React Casino for future projects. We can duplicate it from the CSS standpoint, from the architecture of the components themselves, but the CSS part should be written from scratch. That's my recommendation. Okay, are there any questions? I will first take questions from the room, and then all the questions in the live chat, and then we'll wrap up and see each other tomorrow. Right, so I think that concludes our first presentation. We'll probably get back together and have a second presentation tomorrow. And until tomorrow, you'll get a homework to install the seed project and make it work locally, if you haven't already. Okay, I will update the Google Classroom with that assignment, and please let me know if you have any kind of questions so I can assist you with this process. Also, for our Vietnam colleagues, I'm aware that you don't have Active Directory accounts yet. And as soon as you get them, we can begin doing this as well. You can follow the presentations in the same, basically in the same time, in the same order. And even if you won't start immediately, I'll make sure that you'll start sometime tomorrow. So I'll go to our teams and make sure that your accounts are created and you'll be able to access everything as fast as possible. Any more questions? Anyone? No? Okay, then thank you and see you tomorrow.